things like, so before we were hit the podcast record button, we were talking about how we met each other through John Dahlgren, who he and I are working on a documentary project together with some other folks as well. And you and John worked on a project called
Yeah.
it was called the Longevity Project.
The Human Longevity
Yeah,
Project. Yeah.
which was you went around the world and you filmed all these people who are in the blue zones who've been living like super long time,
Hmm.
and have this long series that people can watch as available. But you started to pick up on things that you're writing in this book that are like shared traits about really thriving beyond the fact that they happen to be very old. What do you think you gain from that that's very salient to like us living now today in 2023?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of gets to the point that you brought up earlier about singularity and this idea that I think there's some people, there's a huge swath of people, because we're in this really interesting phase right now where we have regenerative medicine, which is a really exciting frontier. We're using things like biologics, like stem cells. And there's really cool things that I think that we're going to be able to take advantage of to make life better, to ease suffering and to age more gracefully. But then you have these other sort of technologies that there's this idea that we can live forever, that aging is a disease, and then we need to solve it. And technology is going to play some interesting role, whether that's on the micro level or nanobots. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy ideas in my mind. That stuff's crazy, and it doesn't seem to me to fit into the bigger picture when you understand a little bit more about what life is and how it's operating. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to go out and I guess get a deeper understanding from some of the people that are older, right? I mean, how can I talk about longevity, aging, and what it means to grow old at 42? I don't have the experience. I can talk about it from the mind. I can read studies about certain things, but it's really from these people that are in their 80s, 90s, and 100s that I think we can learn the most. And what you find in that is that there's a general acceptance that life is a process, right? And that aging is not a problem. That rather it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? And this idea that life has these finite limits, and we may not know what those are. It may be 120, it may be 140. There's a potential that we can increase it further. I'm open to that idea, and I think it's important to recognize that isn't the end goal. Even though there's a lot of people out there touting this idea, I'm going to live to 220 and this by doing this and that and that. And I think this is either marketing and sales, right? They're trying to sell you something, or they're so arrogant that they don't really understand what they're saying. And you just look around, all the evidence points to this idea that each species has this kind of, let's say, maximal lifespan, and then this average lifespan, right? You can look at elephant statistics, right? Elephants in the wild. You can look at lions in the wild. You can look at lions in captivity, which actually have a longer expected lifespan. So the environmental conditions for each species tends to set the lifespan that we can expect. Humans are no different, and we can do things about it too. Like we play a role in this thing we call longevity or life. And so to me, I think part of this idea of growing older, and what I noticed when I spoke with people, is that eventually they get to this point and they just kind of give up the trying. They're just like, well, whatever. It's in God's hands. Like I don't need to fight it anymore, right? I think when we're in our youth or in our middle ages, there's this like clinging to our youth, or this we try to reclaim it because we feel it slipping away. Like whether or not we acknowledge this, I think that's what's happening, and why there's this huge striving at when you see these 40s, 50s, and 60-year-olds thinking they're going to live a really long time. I think when we're young, it's this arrogance, and then we start to see this like it's slipping away. What can I do? Because I can still taste it. And then I think at some point you just recognize there ain't no going back. This is just what it is, and I'm cool with it. I lived a good life, and there's beauty along the way. That's what you find. You find with these people that have lived a long life that they enjoy the process of getting older, and that there is beauty in that process of getting older because you can't do as much. You naturally degenerate. There's less you can do, so you start to appreciate things more, right? I mean, I think we all inherently know this, right? When we're at the end of our rope, there's just something that allows us to see the bigger picture in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, you're talking about like, you mentioned something about our environment. And I just think about the things like the environmental toxins that we have to deal with now that weren't around as much. Everything from nanoplastics, just like toxicity in clothing that doesn't get talked about much. It seems like it's just a war on our senses and our bodies, and I praise how resilient our bodies really are. It's
Unbelievable.
incredible. But it also seems like in the name of short-term profits and gains, we like turn a blind eye to like you have to be a detective when you go shopping for food. It's like, the word natural, for instance, like doesn't really mean anything. It's all this marketing versus organic has certain standards, but then you have to understand what that actually means too. And
It's
um,
exhausting, right? Like
it's
I
it
actually
is it's tough.
I don't know how anybody does it. Like I'm in this field and I've done enough research and understanding on this stuff to the point where I think you just get to this recognition of there's a certain way to try to navigate this stuff as the best you can.
Yeah,
And then the rest you kind of have to let go of, right? I mean, I think that's kind of a theme in most of life is that you do the best you can and you
sure.
try not to hold on too tight because you'll drive yourself crazy if you really think, I mean, you'll be a hypochondriac if you think about the off gassing from the carpets and the walls and all the things that are in the food and the water. And so I don't, you get to the point where, for example, with water, I don't need to continue to study all the chemicals and the drug residues and the things that might be in my tap water. I can simply learn how to get the best filtration system I can or source a good water. And when I have to drink tap water, I drink a little tap water. If I'm in an airport and I don't have any other things and I got to drink out of a plastic water bottle, whatever the case, there's always circumstances, right? And instead of just losing your mind over that,
Yeah, yeah,
recognizing that we have the capacity to detoxify, we have the capacity to regenerate. And they found chemicals in the polar ice caps. So there's this stuff is everywhere at this point. We can't. It's in newborns that haven't
yeah.
even
Breast
been
milk.
born,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, yeah.
so you just do the best you can.
Well, now it's part of being a human, I guess.
I-
And over
yeah,
time, we'd probably adapt to it. It just will take some time. It's
true.
crazy.
Actually,
Yeah.
there's research actually showing that some of this stuff on micro levels may actually induce a hormetic or beneficial effect at small levels. The other interesting part of that is that some chemicals have been shown to be more toxic at very low levels. So we don't really know what's happening, and then the combination of all these things is even more mind blowing. And so
Yeah.
again, you just kind of throw up your hands and go, what do? You do the best you can.